Om Ajnana-timirandasya Gyananjana-shalakaya Chakshurun militam yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha. Very good. All right. Well, again, welcome everyone. This talk is going to be a little bit shorter than talks I've given in the past. And I'm going to be speaking very specifically about the devas and devis, about the gods and goddesses. This is something that we've talked about in the past in snippets, kind of touching on different items concerning the gods and goddesses in various talks that I've given in the past. But to my knowledge, at least recently, we haven't really had a talk where I've talked about the gods and goddesses specifically in a talk. So we'll do this today a little bit. This is a very important topic because with Sanatana Dharma very specifically, and really you could say several of the ancient religions, including especially the Greco-Roman understanding of the divine, there has always been this confusion about what is the ultimate, what is the absolute in accordance with natural law or Dharma philosophy. We know, for example, that all the ancients understood that there were many divine beings within the universe, gods and goddesses. That was even carried over a little bit in the later Abrahamic religions in the form of angels. But the previous, more ancient understanding was much more sophisticated than simply the idea of angels. Rather, there were gods and goddesses, what in Sanskrit are called devas and devis, respectively. And the understanding, again, of these beings is very deep. They are myriad, they are very diverse, there is a hierarchy of these divine beings. They all fulfill different functions, they all have different attributes, and on and on and on, to the point where you could study just the gods and goddesses almost for all of your life. There's so much information that's there, so many stories about them. Divyakata, sacred stories about the gods and goddesses. Well, I want to talk a little bit about who are these beings, first of all. And again, without going too deep, because there are many of them. There are many of them. But a little bit about what is their nature and precisely who are they? And who are they in, let's say, the hierarchical structure of the cosmos. All right? And again, we're going to do this somewhat briefly, not going very in depth. First of all, again, it is understood that we are living in a universe that is alive with personality. We are not living in a universe that is dead. Now, this is the modern scientific concept, and really even the Abrahamic concept. Let's deal with the Abrahamic concept, because the modern materialist, atheistic, scientific concept we know we've rejected. But we know that's garbage. So let's deal with the Abrahamic concept. Even in the Abrahamic concept, interestingly, for the most part, as far as levels of various beings who exist, it's understood traditionally. And I'm talking about traditional Christianity. I'm talking about, forgive me, but real Christianity, not modern sects. I'm talking about classical Christianity. It's understood that there are humans, there are angels, there are certainly devils, and then there is God. But that basically is the limit of the understanding of this hierarchy of various beings. In Sanatana Dharma, on the other hand, it's understood that beings, personalities exist everywhere, both good and bad. Beings exist within nature. They exist as nature spirits. We understand that each planet is alive and has a personality. We understand that the sun is a person. We understand that the moon is a person. We understand that certainly trees are, because we know that they're living beings, because they have Atman, they have consciousness. But more than this, we understand that rivers are considered to be living beings. Why? Because they have all of the attributes of a living being. They have a beginning, they have motion, very often they have offspring. From a large river will come smaller rivers, rivulets. They have an endpoint, and we know that rivers do not last forever. They're not immortal. They last for a very long time, but they're not immortal. But they all have personalities. Many people who have this very stereotypical understanding of quote-unquote Hinduism, for example, will know that the so-called Ganges, the Ganga, is very sacred. Unbeknownst to most people, however, it's not merely the Ganga who is sacred, but all rivers are considered sacred. She's the most sacred of them. But there are many, many, many sacred rivers, not just in India, but all rivers themselves are considered sacred. So, for example, the Mississippi is a sacred river. The Missouri is a sacred river. Why? Because these are very expansive, very powerful, very beneficent beings. They bring good to everything they touch. They bring good to the world. Oh, it's because of rivers that we can have civilization, that we can water our crops, etc., etc. We consider mountains to be living beings, again, because they exhibit all of the classical symptoms of what it means to be an organic living entity. And on and on and on. Well, the ancient worldview was such in which we understood, we acknowledged, we embraced, and we respected and indeed worshipped such beings who were considered to be higher than us, beneficent, and thus who had the ability to benefit us. When we think about this very practically, this is not a foreign concept. Who of us has not either ourselves or has known someone, for example, who has propitiated our local congressperson, senator, president? What do? We send, if we're intelligent, we send a very well-crafted, very respectful letter to, let's say, the president or the senator, and explaining our plea. Respected sir, I have experienced this problem in your constituency, and I would plead that you please do something about this, etc., etc. Why? Why do we do this? Very simply, we understand this is someone more powerful than us. They can do things we can't. Therefore, what is our relationship with them? Our relationship with them is a proper one. It is one in which we recognize that hierarchy that is there, and we respect them, and we give them our plea. Sir, can you please do this for us? Well, we see this again, even in the material world. We have bosses, most of us. We do the same thing when we have to approach our boss. What do? Do we do so disrespectfully? Not if we're intelligent. If we're intelligent, Mr. So-and-so. Well, what do we usually ask for? Usually a raise. But how do we do this? We understand this is a person who has power, and we propitiate them. We speak to them respectfully. We look at them in the eye, but at the same time, humbly, and we ask for what we want. And if we gain their favor, they grant that to us. This is life. This is the nature of life and relationship within the material world. This is how we relate to one another. We have individuals who are below us, and our relationship to them is such that we have power, they do not. What do? We try to have compassion toward those people, whether they're our children or just anyone who is dependent upon us. We try to have compassion, mercy, and when we can, especially if they're good people and sincere, we give to them. Then we have people who are on our same level. Those are people who are just our friends, our colleagues. We associate with them. We can be very relaxed with them. And then we have those individuals who are above us. And again, I've already explained how we act with those people. This is the nature of the universe. Even animals do this. Even animals do this. With certain species of animals, with dogs, with wolves, etc., they have a hierarchy. They have a leader of the pack, etc. So again, this is something that we simply see as a part of nature. Now, extending this, you see, from the mere earthly, but now to the cosmic. Well, who are the devas and the devis? Who are the gods and the goddesses? They are beings likewise, just like a president or a prime minister or a boss, a CEO. They are beings with power. They are beings with power who are beneficent, who are good, who are there to help us. They are beings who we can propitiate in the same way that we would anyone in this world. They are beings who we are meant to respect and work in cooperation with. They are beings with whom we are meant to have a relationship of love. See, even in the material world, this is the ideal. Ideally, even the relationship between ourselves and the rulers of a nation or the governor or whoever, it's meant to be a relationship of love. Of course, we know that's very rarely the case in the Kali Yuga. But ideally, that should be the case. This is what creates this harmony despite diversity, this harmony within this hierarchical structure of both the material world and the cosmos. Now let's talk a little bit more specifically about the devas and devis, about the gods and goddesses, and what is their nature. Again, let me go back to how I began this talk. It's interesting how you see sometimes, really it wasn't a problem in the ancient world, but today, looking back upon the ancient world, we've created this problem of polytheism versus monotheism. Again, for the ancients, it wasn't a problem. They understood it. For us, looking back as so-called scholars at the history of religion, oh, polytheism versus monotheism. Oh, there must be some conflict between the two. It was understood by the ancients that there was not. They were both. They were both. And with this understanding, that ultimately, when speaking about that which is the ultimate absolute, that is one. That is ekam. That is, as even Plotinus would say, the one. That was his name for it. That was the Neoplatonic understanding, the Greco-Roman understanding. But then, in addition to the one, below the one, there were also indeed many powerful divine beings, what we would call gods and goddesses. These beings really, internally, in their Atman, in their consciousness, are no different from us. However, they are beings who, due to good karma, due to good activities, became reincarnated in such a manner that they now have a very powerful station in life. Thus, we have beings like Indra, we have beings like Surya, like Chandra, like Mitra, Varuna, like Agni, who are very, very powerful beings, some of whom can live for millions of years, seemingly immortal, but not. The gods, too, are not truly immortal. It's understood that they also ultimately, eventually die, even if it's after millions of years. So truthfully, all of us can indeed become gods, if that's our goal. Looking at this hierarchical structure of the cosmos, as we are reincarnating in accordance with our karma, in accordance with our activities, we can go higher within the material world and ourselves become a very powerful being and live for 5,000, 10,000, a million, a billion years and have tremendous power and be in charge of an entire sector of the universe or of some elementary sort of power. Or, due to very bad karma, we can go in the opposite direction, to the hellish realms, the Patala Loka realms, into the hellish realms and have a very terrible existence. And then within even the realm of Manushya, of human beings, in the proper sense of that term. Even among human beings, there's great diversity. There are human beings, and you've heard me say this before, not merely on this planet, but on many planets. And there are some human beings who are much more advanced than we are, technologically, spiritually, intellectually, even physically, even in their beauty, in every way. Sometimes they visit us. These are what are called the Nordic aliens, if you're into ufology. They visit us sometimes. These are our brothers. They also are Manushya. They're human beings, but much more powerful than we are, almost to the point of being gods themselves. So what does this all say? We live in a very diverse universe. What to speak of a diverse world on this one planet? The entire universe is very diverse, with some beings who are so powerful that you would almost mistake that being for indeed God. And then, on the contrary, some beings who their existence basically is one of suffering, where they live for a very short lifetime. And most of that life is in suffering. And that is their karma. They put themselves there until they reincarnate. Whatever station of life we find ourselves in within the material cosmos is temporary. This is the important thing. What is eternal? That being who is within, that Atman, that consciousness. That is the thread, that is the string that upholds that necklace. And all of those beads on the necklace, those are the lifetimes. But the one thing they have in common is that thread, and that is the consciousness. So, in this diverse cosmos that we have of all these various beings, dealing with this very simply, there are the Manushya, the humans, there are the Asuras, demonic beings, and then there are the Devas, the gods. We wish to, of course, avoid the Asuras as much as possible. We want to associate with the Manushyas, human beings, beings who are like us as much as possible, true humans. And just because a person looks human, that doesn't necessarily mean they are. It's understood that there are over 400,000 species of human beings, according to the Vedas. Okay? And then with the gods, we wish to propitiate the gods. All right? Now, again, without going very deep, because truthfully there are many, many different classes of gods. The three, let's say, broadest categories are what are called the terrestrial beings, the terrestrial gods, the atmospheric gods, and the celestial gods. And let's deal with these, again, very briefly in that order, because I do want to try to keep this talk not very long. Dealing with the terrestrial gods, these are gods who are gods of the earth, who are gods representing natural elements. Yakshas and yakshis, for example, tree gods, tree spirits, spirits of nature, spirits of the forest, spirits, again, of the rivers, etc. These are gods of the earth. Even with these, you can divide these into two kinds. And let me just use English words. You can talk about general terrestrial gods or localized ones. Now, this is where it gets to be somewhat interesting with these beings. That is the earth gods and goddesses. There are localized gods, and this is something that's very important to understand. Tribes have their gods that basically belong to them. Peoples have their gods that belong to them. Regions and geographic locations have their gods that belong to them. And there are hundreds and hundreds of examples of this, of which let me give you one, because we're in America and this fits nicely. The Hopi Indians of the Southwest have their gods known as the Kachinas. Who here has heard this word Kachinas? Okay, very good, almost everyone. When we think of Kachinas, we tend to think of those really interesting dolls that you can go, well, now many places, but especially if you go to the Southwest, you can purchase these. And there are over 400 different Kachinas. And again, that's what we tend to think of, are these dolls that you can purchase, and they're all very interesting. We know that they all represent different things. I have two of them, actually. I have one especially that represents the sun, the power of the sun. And these are the gods very specifically of the Hopi people. Now, interestingly, these are localized divinities. It's known by the Hopis, and this is how they explain it to people. There is a sacred mountain, I forget if it's in Arizona or New Mexico, but it's called San Francisco Mountain, not to be confused with the city of San Francisco. This is an actual little mountain range, and it's understood that that is where the Kachinas live. Okay? Now, who are the Kachinas? Who are these over 400 different beings who are worshipped by the Hopi? They are localized divinities. They are divinities who have always existed in that area, who the Hopi have a special relationship with. And again, this is one of hundreds of examples. The Africans, there's so many African tribes who have their specific divinities who are localized, who apply only to them and their specific tribe, and on like this. So those are localized versus more generalized terrestrial divinities. Okay? And most terrestrial divinities do tend to be localized. Now we have the atmospheric divinities, the second category. These are beings who, as the word implies, have to do more with the atmosphere, have to do with thunder, lightning, have to do with basically that realm in between the earthly realm and the truly cosmic realm. Such beings include, for example, Rudra who represents the power of thunder. Thus they call him the Howling One, Rudra. Rudra is a form of Shiva. But again, this is an atmospheric divinity. Let's go now finally to the highest level, and that is the celestial beings. Celestial beings are really the most important because they are truly universal beings. These are beings who apply to the entire universe, and these are the beings who you tend to see again and again and again with different names, but all throughout the civilized ancient world. Some of these include Vishnu, Brahma, Shiva, not as Rudra, but in the highest sense of Shiva. They include Surya, for example, the sun, etc., etc. So this is about as small a nutshell as I can present, a picture of this hierarchy of the gods and what their various functions are. Now, what I want to do very briefly now is tie in very specifically the idea of the gods with the practice of yajna, what we're about to perform in just a very short time. Again, as I explained before I gave this formal talk, the idea of yajna, a fire ceremony, is something that is indeed itself universal. We find this certainly in all the Indo-European cultures, but also many of the other cultures as well. Almost every Native American tribe, for example, has something called fire ritual, fire ceremony, which is a very simplified replication of this yajna ceremony. We find this all throughout the length and breadth of Europe. We find this also in the concept of the hearth as well in Europe. Again, as a devolved form of the idea of yajna. We find this, again, in many, many cultures. We find this in China as well, with the idea of fire sacrifice and offering fake money into the fire in order to propitiate the gods, etc., etc. So the idea of offering into fire and tying this to the gods is something that is indeed found in many of the ancient cultures. Now, dealing with Vedic culture specifically, we find thousands of passages in the Vedic scriptures talking about this. But two that I wanted to mention very specifically are found in Bhagavad Gita. So I'll just briefly read these. These are from Bhagavad Gita, chapter 3, verses 10 and 11. So first I'll read verse 10 from chapter 3. In the beginning of creation, the Lord of all creatures sent forth generations of men and devas, along with yajna, and blessed them, saying, "Be thou happy by this yajna, because its performance will bestow upon you all desirable things." And now the next verse, verse 11. The devas, being pleased by yajna, will also please you. Thus, nourishing one another, there will reign general prosperity for all. Very nice explanation of, again, this idea of harmony between the various strata of good beings. Because you'll notice that the asuras, the demonic beings, are not mentioned here. They're not part of this picture. We're talking about those beings who are trying to live in accordance with Dharma, those beings who are good, who are beneficent, who are virtuous, noble, etc. There is this idea that, yes, there must be harmony between, specifically, Manushya and Devas, between human beings and gods. And it is a mutual understanding and a mutual, interestingly, nourishment that takes place. On the one hand, we know that the gods give us everything that we need. They give us rain, they give us sunshine. The earth herself is a goddess, Bhumi Devi. It is from the earth that we grow all of the food that we need. So we know that all of our sustenance is as a direct result of the power and the beneficence of the gods. But then in turn, if we simply take all of these blessings, but don't acknowledge these divinities by offering some of it back to them, we're being very ungrateful. So again, the idea is to have this circuit, this harmonious circuit in which they give to us and we offer to them. They give to us and we offer to them. And in this way, we are at one with the universe and all of the beneficent beings who are here in the universe. So this is the idea. This is why we perform yajna. This is the idea of Dharma. This is the idea of, indeed, cosmic harmony. Is that we are meant to live a life in which we understand that we are not alone. Now, you've heard me explain Dharma in 1,000 different ways. Here's another one. We're not alone. This is the concept of Dharma, that we are not merely isolated little atoms, little beings who are living on individual little islands, but rather we are living in a world with others. We are living in a world with multiple beings, and we are meant to cooperate. They are meant to cooperate with us. We are meant to cooperate with them for the betterment of the whole. This is the idea of Dharma. Explanation, yes?
Do you know of any situations where humans as a group, were needed to help the devas or anything? Like, were the devas ever in trouble, they needed help?
From humans? No. No, that's never happened. Yeah, I mean, certainly the opposite has happened many times, that humans have needed very specific help from the devas, and they will come and help. Then, and this is how we know that the devas are themselves limited. There are many, many stories in which the devas themselves need help, and they then appeal to that one who then comes and helps them. But as far as the devas needing the help of humans, other than yajna, as far as some emergency situation, no. No.
They ever asked for humans to do yajna?
Yes, oh yes, they want us to do yajna, yes. Yes, there are different instances where they, in this, what I read here, this is of course Krishna speaking about yajna. But there are other places where you have different devas themselves talking about the importance of yajna. And then, of course, there are works, the Brahmanas specifically, different sacred texts where it goes very deep into how you perform yajna. So yes, they are very open about the fact that they encourage yajna very, very much. Yeah, and of course, in their mind, they are very wonderful, beneficent, munificent beings. They want us to do yajna for our own sake, because it's good for us. This is the thing that is wonderful about any sacred activity. When you do a sacred activity, this is why it's called auspicious. It's good for all beings. It's healthy, literally healthy for all beings. even if it's directed toward a specific being, the very fact of that activity's existence creates an auspicious atmosphere that is good for all sentient beings. So this is why, for individuals who have experienced yajna in the past, and we're going to do a very short one. I've been to yajnas that have gone on for 3 hours. I'm sure other people have as well. You can go to a Hindu temple and, you can be sitting there and there'll be 4 priests. This is the largest yajna where you'll have 4 priests. And rather than a small yajna pit like this, it'll be massive, larger than my chair, and there'll be a roaring fire, and it will go on for hours where they're saying mantras and offering things and saying mantras and offering things and offering. And it creates, as you're sitting there, such an auspicious, such a peaceful atmosphere that you literally could just sit there for 2 hours. And you don't feel bored. You don't feel as if you feel as if time has been altered. It's such an auspicious atmosphere that's created because you can quite literally feel the stratas of the cosmos coming together and now existing on one plane, even for a short period of time. It's amazing that as we do this yajna today, which again will be a very brief one, people will get a little taste of that. But especially if you go to one of these very, very large yajnas where you have many priests and many people there and it goes on for a long time, you can experience this.
Why does the yajna give pleasure to the devas and devis?
It feeds them. It's feeding them. The devas and devis don't eat food in the material sense. They can if they choose, and if they did so, they would do so only for pleasure, not for nourishment. Rather, the way that they derive their nourishment is in subtle energetics. Things that are offered into the fire are transformed. They no longer have physical presence, but their inner essence ascends and is then consumed by the devas.
Are all the devas and devis in astral bodies, or do they sometimes manifest in physical, material bodies?
Well, they wouldn't really manifest in physical bodies. They can appear as physical bodies. They can be accessed as if they are physical, but their ultimate essence is not physical, if that makes sense.
We never see them on this level.
Mm-hmm. Yes, and that's because they're not physical. They certainly can make themselves appear physical such that we can indeed see them. In the Kali Yuga, they don't have much reason for doing that. They're not very motivated to do that in the Kali Yuga. In the previous Yuga, in the Dwapara Yuga, previous to 5,200 years ago, it's actually said that in that Yuga, it was still the case that human beings and the devas could see themselves face to face. They could literally encounter each other face to face. And in fact, when you had coronations of very great kings, Maharajas in the true sense of that term, Chakravartins, the devas themselves often would come and be there. It's funny, I was describing this to someone just yesterday, I believe, through Skype. Yes, just yesterday. This is why, for example, with very, very correctly built Vedic temples, even to this day, part of the architecture is that all the way high, if you were to look, sometimes you can see it, sometimes you can't, sometimes it's kind of hidden. There should be an opening leading to the outside of the temple. Sometimes it's very simple, it's just almost like a hole. In other cases, it's very ornate, and it can even be so large that a human being could really walk through it if they wanted to, but physically it would be impossible. Because on the one side there's the sky, on the other side you would just fall into the temple. But built properly, every Hindu temple should have that. The idea being that way the gods themselves can descend from above if they so choose and come into the temple to themselves worship or say mantras or whatever they wish to do, but also very specifically, again, when yajna takes place, this is how they enter into the temple. Something that's not very well known by many people, but a truly Orthodox Hindu temple should have that. Even if it's small, the size doesn't matter. It can be that small, the deva can get through. The size doesn't matter. But yes, these are non-corporeal beings. As far as what they are actually composed of, that also will vary in accordance with how advanced and how high a being they are. So all the way to the very highest, Brahma, who is the highest of beings, he is composed of what in Greek would be called nous. He is composed of pure intellect, of buddhi, of pure intellect. Literally, his form is intellect. In the same way that our form is matter, comprised of the 5 elements. Brahma's form is comprised of intellect. If you can imagine that. And then again, different beings will have their forms comprised of different elements. One thing that they all have in common is precisely what the term deva means, light. They are all beings of light. They are all beings who emanate light, regardless of how advanced they are. This is why when you see them, the first thing that strikes you if you're human is the light. You see this radiance. And in some cases, they're so radiant that you're almost blinded. They have to literally kind of reduce their own radiance by will such that you can actually see them through the radiance. But deva means beings of light. That's the literal translation of deva.
Have they all been incarnate on this planet at some point?
Not all, no. Many of them have come, and specifically when Narayana comes, when Vishnu comes in his incarnations, many of the devas accompany him in order to help, but certainly not all of them. Just whoever he chooses, he picks whichever devas he wants to assist him with any particular avatar, any particular incarnation. Yeah, so they haven't all been here. This is not to make the devas sound bad, not at all. But coming to Earth is slumming for them. They would prefer not to come here. And again, it's not because they're elitist. On the contrary, it's actually because they are beings who are so good. They are very sattvic. They are beings who try to exist in a realm that is pure goodness, or at least as much goodness as is possible, again, depending on where they are in the hierarchy, for their own sake. So they try to avoid places where there's darkness, ignorance, just anything evil. So they will come here once in a while, but it's not a pleasant thing for them. Especially, and we're talking about in the Kali Yuga. In previous yugas, they were much more prone to coming here. Many of them delighted in coming here, actually. We have stories, yes, of many of the devas and devas coming here for various reasons. But then they had much more advanced humans to associate with. It was a pleasure. Now it's not pleasure anymore. When they came to Earth, the humans 100,000, 200,000 years ago were so much more advanced that the human beings were so much more advanced, they themselves were almost like devas. So they enjoyed coming here. The atmosphere, the environment was so much more pure that it was not a burden for the devas to come here.
May I ask one more question?
Yes, definitely.
You mentioned there are more than 200,000 species of human beings. How are we supposed to think of such a huge number? I'm sure that if the archaeologists or the ethnobiologists got busy, they would find there are only a few thousand ethnic groups on this planet.
They would have to get spacesuits. Because again, humans, Manushya, this class of beings known as Manushya, the descendants of Manu, these are human beings, exist not just on this planet, but on many, many, many different planets. So we're speaking not just of here, but of other planets. Then there are humans who live on planets that are not predominated by humans, where they're a minority. So really, we're talking about many planets that exist within the cosmos, where there are human-like beings who would fit under the category of Manusya. Some are, nowhere near as advanced as we are. They would be the equivalent of cavemen. Some would be much more advanced than us, to the point where if we met them, we would think we're meeting gods. But we're not. They're humans. They're classified as humans, but just much more advanced. Much taller, much more of just physically in perfect condition, and not just strength-wise and subtly. Their bodies are just supple and healthy and vibrant and just wonderful. Again, it's interesting. Getting back to this concept of the devas as beings of light. The reason why they're beings of light is very simply because the more spiritually advanced you become, the more glowing you are, the more ojas, to use the Ayurvedic term, the more ojas, the more glow you have to you. This is why you can see a person who is very unhealthy, who is an alcoholic, and just has a very unhealthy lifestyle. They just have no glow to them, no light whatsoever. Then you look at someone who's spiritual and they're radiant. We use this word all the time about people. Oh, that person's radiant. Well, you can imagine a being like a deva who is so much more advanced than the typical human being. Yes, they are truly radiant. So radiant that you almost have to cover your eyes if you're in their presence. It's a tangible radiance. Yeah. So there are many, many human beings who exist, not just here, but many different planets. Yeah.
Are the devas and devis striving towards liberation?
Some are. Many aren't. And it's very interesting. This is why it's actually said that as far as the sort of incarnation that you wish in order to make spiritual progress, the human incarnation is best. This is the reason why. Again, of these three strata, the hellish realms, earthly realms, heavenly realms, in the hellish realms, things are just so bad you can't even begin to practice spiritual life. We've talked about this even just on this earth. If a person is in such poverty and pain and misery, how can they even think of anything spiritual? So you can't really practice much spirituality in the hellish realms. But then in the heavenly realms, interestingly, things are so materially perfect, where there is no such thing as unhealth. Every being has perfect radiant health. There's no such thing as starvation. You literally have everything that you need. Every single need and pleasure is taken care of for you. Unfortunately, the bad thing about this is that also it's not conducive to spiritual life, because then what happens? You get accustomed to all of these very advanced material pleasures, forgetting that, well, it's a really wonderful material pleasure. It's a very intense material pleasure, but it's still a material pleasure. And you don't have quite that impetus to go beyond the material world, and you lose sight of the fact that, oh yes, I'm living on a heavenly plane where, let's say, I'm going to live for 10,000 years, 100,000 years, and everything is wonderful. Oh, just see, I have this power. Oh, I can even float and fly and levitate. It's so wonderful. Not understanding that you are there because of your karma. When that karma runs out, you're going to die, even as a deva, and continue reincarnation. Maybe you'll be reincarnated again as a deva, or maybe as a human, or maybe as an ant. You don't know. But yes, true spiritual life to the point of liberation is very difficult if you're a deva, because you're surrounded by too much pleasure. That's why the human form of life is considered a blessing, because we have the ability, from our perspective, to see both. We can experience hell on this planet or a lot of heaven on this planet. And very often in one lifetime, you experience both. And we have perspective. We have perspective. Thus, we have more of an impetus to seek liberation. Yeah. Does that answer your question? Mm-hmm. Very good. Any other questions?
Yeah, I don't know, I'm just kind of curious about the atmospheric beings. Talk more about them. Like Rudra.
Yeah, Rudra, Indra, there are a whole bunch of them. They are beings who are not tied down to the earth. They are beings who are not localized, but they tend to be, let's say, well, two strata. They tend to be limited either to one planet or to an atmospheric phenomena that is interplanetary. So, for example, storms. Storms are interplanetary, but still they are atmospheric. They occur geographically within the atmosphere. Does that make sense? So this is why you have various classes. You have Maruts, you have Rudras. These are beings of storm, of thunder, etc. These are beings who assist Indra, who is the highest of atmospheric beings. The atmosphere is considered to be one of many portals that connect the terrestrial world to celestial reality. This is why the higher we go, the more difficult it is within physical form to exist. This is why it's so interesting. People who try to climb Mount Everest, just mountain climbers, don't know that inwardly, for materialistic reasons, of course, but inwardly they are replicating what yogis have done for thousands of years. That is, trying to physically go higher and higher into more rarefied atmospheres, such that eventually they can commune with the gods. This is why, I have always found it fascinating reading about the stories of people who have climbed specifically Mount Everest, because it's the highest and it's in the Himalayas. The experiences that some of these people have had has been amazing, and you can read this on your own. Into Thin Air, I think, was one famous book, and a whole bunch of these, where people will report going to the summit of Mount Everest. And for example, there was one mountain climber who wrote about this, about while he was up there, your entire consciousness is altered. You feel as if you're in a different world and you no longer have a body. There are physical reasons why. It's because of the air. The air has changed and how your breathing has changed, etc. But there are people who have reported being up there, and in that altered consciousness, they'll look and they'll see objects floating there. They'll see vehicles just there floating, and they'll see beings on top of them. And of course, when they come back down, they'll just say it was a hallucination, and the doctors will say, oh, yes, your breathing was altered, so you were hallucinating. Well, they're, of course, just describing Vimanas. They're describing the gods. You see, the scriptures say the same thing. The scriptures say that if you go high enough in the Himalayas, you're going to see these Vimanas. You're going to see the gods flitting around on the highest realms of our atmosphere. There are mountain climbers who have talked about other beings they've encountered. You know, there was one person who I read, he talked about how when he finally started walking down, he could tell that there were beings behind him walking down with him, and that they were protecting him. Just all sorts of stories, hundreds of stories like this. Yeah, you can encounter the atmospheric beings very simply. It's just a matter of location, of geographical ascent.
And what does the thunder does it perform other purposes?
Yes. Thunder is a very interesting phenomenon. Well, thunder in the spiritual sense of the thunder god is a very interesting phenomenon in that it is both material and spiritual. It is both material in that when we speak of thunder, we're speaking quite literally of the power of thunder, a meteorological power of thunder as a manifestation of the power of the god of thunder. But more than this, thunder, and let's use the Sanskrit, Vajra, also has, many of us know, a spiritual meaning. This is true in Vedic civilization. This is also true in Tibetan Buddhism. Thus you have, for example, Vajrayana. You have the way of the thunderbolt, or the way of the diamond. Vajra also means diamond. It is symbolic of enlightenment as well. For me, the most important aspect of the Vajra, of the thunderbolt, of Indra, is that it also represents the power of Dharma. Dharma Vajra. It represents the power of Dharma. It represents Dharma. One Dharma needs to be a force in this world against evil. A martial force against evil as a weapon. Dharma itself, interestingly, becomes manifest sometimes as weapons. The most powerful of them actually is the Sudarshana chakra, the Dharma chakra. If you look at our logo, we even have that on there, you know, the wheel, the chakra. But specifically what's called Sudarshana chakra, Dharma as a weapon, meant to destroy evil. But then another one of these weapons is the Vajra, the thunderbolt. The other thing is speaking very specifically in the metaphysical sense about the idea of the thunderbolt and how the thunderbolt is produced by Indra. What we experience as the thunderbolt, the clap of thunder, the sound, and then seeing the lightning within the material world when there's a storm, you know, what we're perceiving with the ears and with the eyes is the latter manifestation of what is in actuality a power of the God. It is a power that's manifest through mantra, but more, Indra actually has a weapon known as the Vajra. That is the source of what we then see much later on as lightning or the thunderbolt. And that weapon itself is considered to be a sacred weapon that is a manifestation itself of Dharma. Thus, Indra is holding a manifestation of Dharma. As we know, the kings have a scepter. A king will have a scepter. The scepter is something that represents their monarchical power. It's something that really represents that they are ruling on behalf of God. You see this throughout the history of Europe, including even Christian Europe, but you see this in ancient times as well. Well, Indra himself also has a scepter, but in his case, it is a very powerful metaphysical weapon known as Vajra. And it itself is a manifestation in weapon form of Dharma. I have rarely talked about this. It's hard for us sometimes to imagine Dharma as a weapon. We tend to think, of course, of Dharma in the more spiritual sense. Dharma as goodness, as natural law, as harmony within the universe, etc. But Dharma also can be weaponized. And that is what Indra wields. Vishnu also wields Dharma weaponized in the form of Sudarshana chakra, a discus that can be used to bring light to the world, but also to quite literally destroy evil.
I've heard that, I don't remember what tradition this was from, and maybe it was Native American or something, but that the thunder was supposed to destroy negative beings or something like that.
Yes. The sound of thunder, this is why, for example, in some traditions you clap very hard, you do different things in order to dissipate dark entities. Thunder scares demonic beings, evil spirits.